My CTO is my manager of sorts. He is one of the architect for WebSocket protocol. When the founders at Aklivity were looking for an core engineer, they had this criteria that all the applicants should have some sort of open source contribution. One of our employees, he was working at Cloudera for 10 years or so. He helped me, understand the process, because this is kind of a vast ocean, this open source contribution, and you can easily get lost. I don't really have a lot of experience doing data structures in my college days. We are interested in machine learning, and day after tomorrow you're doing some natural language processing, or you cannot keep switching things, because to learn something it takes time, it takes consistent effort. Keep building your profile, because that's the only variable that is in your control, right?
I'm going to switch to a new segment now, which is called Let's Get Nerdy. Okay. This is where I'm going to ask you to list some of your favorite keys.
I use a Keychron mechanical keyboard, so I like this loud noise, when you are building a career long time. If you keep running behind all this fancy terminologies or buzzword, that's very short-lived. Tomorrow we might not have so much hype for one particular technology.
Welcome to Beyond the Bracket. I am Nitesh.
And I am Pariti, and today we're thrilled to have Ankit Kumar with us. Ankit is a core engineer at Aklivity, a remote open source startup that builds APIs for streaming data. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Ankit.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for having me.
Let's begin by sharing a little bit of your personal story and what you were doing before you got this remote job. Yeah, can you share a little bit about that?
Certainly, Pari. So before I started working at Aklivity, I was employed at Walmart, and before that I worked on a couple of more organizations. One of them was Cloudera. So I have been working with this streaming domain for like 5-6 years now, almost all my career. So Aklivity is my fourth job, and I started, working at Aklivity for like past 1 year, 1.5 years now.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit about how you got this remote job, how you got into Aklivity?
So I started my career as a software engineer at a fintech company called Financial Software Systems. And after a year, I moved to Cloudera, where I worked as a support engineer for close to 2.5 years. After that, I got an opportunity to work at Walmart, where I was one of the engineers who was responsible for building this omni-channel experience for our customers, where they can have this data platform which kind of unifies their entire shopping experience. And after working at Walmart, I got an opportunity to join this startup called Aklivity, which is like fairly a young startup. A very limited number of people were working when I joined this company. And to answer your question on how I got this job, I have to, travel back to my days at Cloudera. So Cloudera, I understood the importance of all these open source projects and how important it is for us in terms of our career growth and also in terms of our knowledge growth to be involved or to be associated with these kind of initiatives based on our interest. So my interest was primarily streaming data. So I naturally got involved with Apache Kafka a lot. I kind of was one of the core support engineer, primarily working to solve the Kafka issues. And later I also started doing some little bit of contribution to open source project, like nitpicks or basic documentation changes or minor bug fixes. But that was kind of opening for me into the open source contribution space. And somehow when the founders at Aklivity were looking for an core engineer, they had this criteria that all the applicants should have some sort of open source contribution. So I guess the the start of my application for Aklivity started like 3-4 years back, when I made some contribution to Apache Kafka. And later, while kind of working with the founders, it's like kind of a very different process than the usual interview, right, at Aklivity. So generally you have this few rounds of problem solving, or some sort of return test or some sort of coding test that you can take up on various platforms. But at Aklivity, the process was very different. Like after having some initial discussion, the task that was given to me was to kind of go through the open source project that they have, which is Zilla. and kind of pick up any issues that's listed on their repository and work on that. So that itself was a very big challenge, and also one of the positive green flag for me, because I'm going to spend all those time going through the project where I have a possibility that I'll actually be end up working on that project in my future. So I think that's how I was able to secure a job at Aklivity. And after doing some bit of contribution for around a month or so, I was finally able to hit the hit the point where the founders were okay with me to join the team officially.
But you said that you were introduced to open source back at your job at Aklivity, and that is when you made your first contribution in the open source domain. So how were you able to make the first contribution? Like, was it a common thing at your company?
So I wouldn't say it's like 100% common, that it's not like all 100% of the employee are doing the same thing, but at least there was this awareness, because we were supporting open source projects, and lucky for me there were a lot of existing contributors, committers, and even PMC members at Cloudera. So there was a lot of guidance from them. I remember one of our employee, he was like working at Cloudera for 10 years or so. He helped me understand the process, because this is kind of a vast ocean, this open source contribution, and you can easily get lost in this, where you are not able to find what is the next step, or what is expected out of your current step. So I think I had a lot of guidance from a lot of experienced people, a lot of help, I should say, while doing my first contribution.
Can you also tell us about one amazing part of your work when it comes to the people you're able to work with?
I think in my current job, the best part is you get to work with people who are distributed across the geography, right? And like I have my teammates working out of Europe, US, and so many other places. And also the skill set that each one of us have is widely different from one another. One of the best part about working in this job is that you get to interact with the people who have close to 20 years of experience, 50 years of experience, and you get to learn from those sort of people who have done wonders in our field. My CTO is John Fellow. He is one of the co-founder at Aklivity, and so he's my manager of sorts. So I spend most of my time working with him directly. So he is one of the architect for WebSocket protocol, and he has done, like, I think, a lot of work in this space. He has written a couple of books around these technologies, spent a lot of years at Oracle. So I think just the thought process, or just after every PR feedback, the learning is just exponential for me. So yeah.
That's crazy. Like I don't think like working like remote work enables so much. Like you are able to work with such amazing people, which you wouldn't have gotten access to if you were working a job in your own country. Or
Yeah,
So,
I mean, definitely. Even if like there is an opportunity that I work from here, and there is someone in my team or in the organization who possesses this kind of experience, you will not have that much of interaction, right? Your interactions are very limited. But when you are working with them directly, it's kind of that you have that freedom that you can go to your mentor or go to your manager about all the help that you need. I remember bugging people for a lot of basic questions or doubts. And the best part about people with so much of experience and such mentalities, that you will never feel as if you are kind of bugging people, or you have you don't know anything. It's always learning, and a lot of encouragement. I still remember, like, when I first joined, it was a little hesitant. Like, I was a little hesitant to kind of ask all these basic questions. But after working in this company for more than a year now, I feel very comfortable, even if I know this is like very silly questions. But it's always, you have to push that point away, that you cannot ask this type of questions. You always have this freedom that you can ask, and you will get some sort of insights a lot of time it's not a spoon feeding an answer. It's not like, hey, do this change and it will work. A lot of time it's a thinking process, or it's a lot of to and fro, where your mentor or the person from whom you're learning will give you some pointers like, hey, I feel that this is the way that you can take. But you also have the freedom that you take up your own ideas and your own implementation if you feel confident enough. So I think all these points are really necessary if you are in this remote working scenario, where you have to have that interest that I want to deliver as best as I can, irrespective of challenges that I'm encountering. So I think that's one of the main points.
I also wanted to ask, like, how could someone, if today, like, someone decided that they want to contribute to the Zilla repository, how would you advise someone go about doing that, if they have some knowledge with Apache Kafka, for instance?
So I think the first step would be is to go to a repository, first understand what we are trying to do, because it will be really difficult to do contributions, or I should say meaningful contribution to a repository where you don't actually understand how it works, like what are the functionalities or the features of that particular product. So the first step would be is to understand there are a ton of examples and quick starts available that will help you achieve that very quickly. Next step is to understand how we are trying to solve a problem, right? Like there is a list of issues available on the repository, listed on the repository, and you can, if you're interested on one particular thing, I think the community is quite active, where you can express your interest to to solve a certain problem, or if you have encountered such a problem and you have reported that bug, or you reported an improvement and you want to work on that. So that itself is something that we always encourage the people to do. After that, once you have an idea about what you want to do, is submit some sort of a proposal like, hey, I generally prefer this. People might have different way of doing things, but my preference is always put in a plan like, hey, this is the problem. This is how I'm planning to solve it. These are the certain things that I've assumed will we need to consider while implementing this. So it's always helpful in that sense, where you have a plan of action available, so that someone who have more experience around that area is going to help you with some positive feedbacks like, hey, if you take up this road, there is going to be such and such challenge that you'll be facing, and so on. So if you are able to come up with a plan, or come up with a clear-cut set of actions that this is how I'm planning to solve this issue, definitely someone from the community, or someone who is already working on a similar feature is gonna chime in, help you with whatever the help is required. And sometimes it is that no such help is required. It's the solution is pretty straightforward. You don't even have to go through so many hoops. You can just take up whatever latest is available, do your changes on top of it, and raise a PR, and probably mention someone from the community like, hey, can you please take a look at this PR for this issue. So the process is as simple as that. Again, like every other open source repository or a project, we also have certain set of guidance that's available in our README pages, that if you're trying to contribute to this project, you have to follow certain coding standards and certain rules that we have imposed so far on our project. So I think that's pretty much it.
Can you also share what's an important thing that remote work has enabled for you in your personal life?
Okay, that's a really good question. So in personal life, I think the major positive impact is that I get to spend a lot of time with my family, and also like I have a 1-year-old son, so it's really great to spend these initial years closely. Another thing that have majorly helped me to kind of get the best out of this remote job is to set certain boundaries. I understand there are exceptions, like when you have to extend your work hours, or take up calls that are not necessarily in your comfortable time. But those are very limited days as per my experience. Those are only when you are pushing on some very strict deadlines and timelines that you have for your tasks. But in other sense, it's generally how you define your work hours, right? Like since I'm working with people on different time zones, I don't necessarily have strict work hours for myself. Like it's not like I have to log in at 9 or 5, or there is no such restrictions. So we have to be very careful in this sense. A slight slip will make you feel like you're working the entire day. So you have to have some sort of guidelines, which I'm trying to kind of implement in my life as well as I go through this remote work journey. That you have to have set number of hours for your work, and post that, even though you have a lot of pending work, you have to take away some time, which is obviously have helped me to kind of contribute better to my work, because you have this refreshment time, and you get to spend some time with your family and other things that you are interested in. And after that, getting back to work is gonna help you even more than if you have worked for all those hours and just keep pushing at it for a problem. So I think it has both its pros and cons in this kind of a remote working environment.
Nitesh, would you like to talk about?
Yeah, sure. So I'm here to take over for the next segment, which is we'll be asking you for some pieces of advice for the listeners. The first thing, actually, before we do that, is something I'm really curious about. It sounds like your work is like actually really hardcore engineering work, which involves a lot of really complicated stuff, and not just creating HTML, CSS, JavaScript code. I'm personally curious to know, like, does your data structures and algorithms knowledge from the past help you at your job?
I don't really have a lot of experience doing data structures in my college days. I wish I would have done that, but I didn't really. It was like free land for me in college. And over like at the end of the college, or probably once the placement thing started, then you understand how important data structures is. And even like there is this understanding that data structures is important to crack that interview or crack that particular round. But I think if you understand those concepts really well, not just from a thought process that this is going to help me solve a particular problem, if you understand how you can leverage those algorithms, or you can leverage those mental model across the problem that you're trying to solve, is always really helpful, and you can keep improving your own way of doing things again and again.
Right. So you didn't get your first job like through like data structures in your interview or something like that?
Definitely, when I say I don't have a lot of experience, it wasn't like I was spending like 10 hours on a certain platform doing data structures. I definitely knew that I was able to crack interviews, but definitely not to a standard where I was doing FANG and MANGs at that level. I guess for me, that's how I put in the levels, right? The type of interviews that you are able to crack. So my standard wasn't that high at that time, but over a period of working in this industry for, I guess, close to 6 years now, definitely that has changed a little bit. I like to believe so that I'm a little better in data structures than I was earlier.
So my question is going to ask you to take yourself back to your time in college, and how has your thinking about building a successful career evolved since then?
Okay, so I think one problem that me and a lot of people like me in college had was the visibility. Your focus is very restricted. The number of companies or number of organizations you know about is very restricted. You either know all these well-known companies or all these service-based companies. You are missing out on a lot of good positions or good organization where you can work, just because you don't have that kind of visibility around you. So the best part that you can do is kind of explore what are the options that's available. Let's say if you have a interest in AI ML, or you have interest in more of a, let's say, certain product specific things, like if you want to contribute to one particular product, then you can go around, see how you can do that, what are the companies that is using those product or building that product. So I think having that sort of visibility is going to help people immensely. And next would be to understand that a lot of things that we are learning in college is a lot outdated, and there are these new things that's coming up every day, and you need to have that kind of track on those things, just to know which curve to take, or what are the new topics that you want to know about. And always data structures and algorithms, who can forget that?
But if you were in college today, then what would you be doing in order to give yourself a boost in your career, like early on?
I think I would start contributing to open source projects a lot early. I'll start to learn about. I remember using a lot of open source libraries when I was in college for projects and stuff. But I have never had that model where I thought, I can do this, contributing to this repositories or libraries or projects. And there is this perception that, I'm not good enough to do that, or, this can only be done by professionals and whatnot. But I think that mentality needs to have some sort of we need to evolve from that mentality. You can definitely dive into projects. You can start with taking up minor or newbie level issues and work your way towards major feature development and stuff. So I think that's something that visibility was not there for me. Or I think if I were to go back, I guess that's something that I would definitely spend a lot of time thinking or exploring to
And
kind
how
of
do you find these open source repositories to contribute to?
sorry.
How would you find these open source repositories to contribute to? Because like you don't have the experience with when you're in college, like say Kafka or something very technical, so that you can contribute to something like Aklivity, open source repo probably. So how would you be discovering the repository?
I think the major point there would be your interest. So when we say open source projects, there's going to be hundreds, thousands of projects. You cannot possibly go through every one of them and try to contribute left, right, and center. It doesn't work that way, right? So you have to understand what your interests are and what are the project that is associated with that domain that you're interested in. And then, like me contributing to Zilla or Activities repository is because I have some interest in streaming. It's what have enabled me to do these contribution to this repository. It's not that out of 1,000 open source projects I'm going to pick randomly one and then start contributing. That is not a very feasible way, I should say, because if you don't have interest, you are going to do some minor contributions which is not very significant and then lose interest altogether, and that contribution is not going to help you in any way positively in your career unless until you have some sort of major understanding or the complete understanding of that project. You will keep struggling to prove that those open source contribution actually means something. So I think interest is the main entry point for any of these work that involve open source contribution.
That makes a lot of sense. And what advice do you share with your developer friends when they come to you and ask for, advice on getting a kick-ass job like you have?
So I think the understanding of kick-ass job varies from people to people. When we start listing out all the perks, then definitely all of all of the people that will be interested in your job. But you also have to make them aware of all that is expected out of you in that job as well. So I think my advice would be to keep building your profile and have a targeted section. It's not like today you are interested in doing batch processing, tomorrow you're interested in machine learning, and day after tomorrow you're doing some natural language processing. Or you cannot keep switching things, because to learn something, it takes time, it takes consistent effort. Let it be learning data structures, let it be learning UI UX, or any field you take, you need to be consistent about it. I've seen people working on same field for 5 years, 10 years, and still they are learning continuously. So you're never at a point where you have reached a threshold like I've learned enough for my career, I'm not gonna learn new things. It's kind of at that point you start to have that downfall. So it's always necessary to keep focused on certain things, and you keep building towards that. It's going to help you, not immediately. You will not see that after a week or 10 days you got a fancy job, but definitely over a period of time you have improved your profile so much that obviously organizations are going to be interested in you. And that too in today's world, when the job market is fluctuating like anything. Like you hear news about so many layoffs and restricted amount of hiring. Very limited people are getting opportunity to even interview for opening. So in scenarios like that, the best you can do is keep building your profile, because that's the only variable that is in your control, right? All the rest of everything is like, most of them are driven by other factors, but at least what you have in your hands is you keep pushing towards one point or one target that you want to achieve, and sooner or later I believe that you're gonna achieve that. So
That's advice.
probably probably not the advice people generally like to hear, but I think that's me being honest.
No, I think this is spot on. You're spot on with, like things are out of control. Like the job market right now, it's really messed up. And the best thing that you can do is to focus on building yourself in this market. I agree with it.
I'd
Yeah.
also like to ask, like in terms of technology, right now you're using Kafka, and would you ever like decide to switch to like another technology domain? Like, would you be interested in learning new things at this point in your career?
So I have this understanding that once I reach a point where I don't have anything new to learn from either a role or either a technology, or I'm at a point where I feel stagnated. I think that's the point where you have to take up something new and pursue that. Because if you keep, there is this comfort zone, right, where you know what to do, you take very less time to do the task that probably people who have far less experience than you or far less knowledge than you is struggling to do. That's the point where you have to decide, you have to take up that comfort zone to another level where you don't want to escape from it, or you want to take up new things. Because initial stage is I think one of the hardest one, where you have to have that interest that's gonna keep you at it, or need to have that interest consistently so that you can achieve some knowledge or experience around that topic. So moving to a new, like tomorrow, if I have to take up a new technology altogether, it's definitely going to be a difficult one. But I think that's the most recommended action forward, that you choose what's the new area of interest for you. Probably last time I checked, and now there are probably 50 more new fields that have started shining in the market. You have to take, again, evaluate and take which part you want to pursue.
Do you have any recommendation for, like, when you say 50 new fields have come up in the market? So which of these are really hot? I mean, I know AI is hot, anything to do with AI. Anything else that people might not be thinking about, that's not popular in the sense that a lot of people are doing it, but it's still valuable?
Uh, so again, now we are going through a trend where we see a lot of resumes or interviews that people have mentioned, like, I know certain technology, but their knowledge or their experience or exposure around that is just on the top level. So I think we don't necessarily have to go looking for a top 10 new technologies in this sector. You can take up technology that exists for like 10 years or so and still put in the effort to be one of the best in that particular technology. Definitely you will have a lot of people who are far more experienced and knowledgeable than you are, but you also have that much of input or materials to take and put in to use for you to learn all this. And in terms of new technology, definitely AI is the buzzword, just like blockchain was. I don't know, like it's really hard for me to keep following every that's getting generated. But you just have to be focused around what you are interested in, what is your skill set more particularly. If you, like, every time you start learning AI and then you just heard about, or you go through a blog where it says that blockchain is the next big thing, then you leave whatever AI thing you have done so far and then move to blockchain. It doesn't really make sense. If you're interested about making something your career, or genuinely get exposure in that particular field, is to go in deep, at least the initial part of the career, where you are an engineer, you are not functioning as an architect, or you are not functioning as a head who is responsible to kind of oversee UI UX engineering support and QA in every team. You are at a point where you are an individual contributor, and you have to have that in-depth knowledge, because that is what expected out of you.
That's good advice. Okay, I'm going to switch to a new segment now, which is called Let's Get Nerdy.
Okay.
This is where I'm going to ask you to list some of your favorite resources. So, what resources, let's say newsletters, books, or courses, have you taken up over the last few years that have helped you?
So there's this book that was recommended by one of my senior at Walmart, was Designing Data Intensive Application. There's this huge book. I think it was written by Martin Kuppelman or something. I don't remember exactly. That is really an awesome book if you're interested in distributed systems at all. That gives you a lot of hidden perspective of distributed systems, and how you can distributed systems, and it is not at all like, I have never felt it is very technology specific, like you need to know Kafka to understand this book, or you need to know Spark, or you need to know any such technology to learn that. It is very a core concept oriented book, so you don't have to have like expertise in one of those technology to go read this book. So I think that's definitely one of the major recommendation from me. And then in terms of courses, I think when I was starting Kafka, I bought, I think his name is Stephen Maverick. His courses on Kafka is like amazing. He has this very easygoing way of helping us understand how Kafka works. And I think there are a lot of material from him around AWS, Kubernetes, and whatnot. But I think I have gone through his Kafka courses, and it's all really good. I think that's like one of my starting point where I tried to understand all other ecosystem. So Kafka ecosystem is, you have this core Kafka, and then you have connectors and stream and KSQL and other new things. So even though I had some idea about the core Kafka, his courses helped me a lot to understand all these ecosystem, how each module interacts with each other and stuff like that.
Nice. Love this. I'll link to both of these in the show notes so listeners can check it out. Any other like blogs or I don't know subreddits or Discord servers that you follow?
So on Reddit, I'm generally interested in going through Kafka subreddit. A lot of people, share interesting solutions, interesting problems, all those homemade projects that they have done, or libraries that they have created for the ease of usage. It's really interesting. We keep going through those posts just to understand what is the current expectation is from general users on certain topics. So I think Kafka subreddit is helpful. Also, I have subscribed to the mailing list of Kafka community. So whenever there is discussion around new features or which approach to take, releases and so on, you get all these notifications or through mail. So whenever I get chance, I try to follow just to keep myself updated on what's going on in terms of a community or in terms of the project roadmap. So I think these are like some things that I'm interested in.
Nice. And what tools do you use and love at work? These can be like small tools or big tools that help you be more productive.
I think I don't think I use any fancy tools that are like extremely
Maybe simple tools, yeah, like regular tools of the trade.
So I think the most part of my job is I spend on working on IntelliJ as my go-to editor, and terminal, I guess. That's the most basic and most important tool for every one of us. Like, it's irrespective of whether you are a UI developer or a backend developer or SQL developer. It doesn't matter. Terminal is your friend. So definitely quite useful. I also use this I term, which is kind of a spin-off of terminal. That's kind of useful for me. There are a bunch of shortcuts and additional features that I've been habituated for past 3-4 years. So kind of helps me out a lot. Also, I think that is pretty much it. Just Docker and whatnot, all these basic things. I might not be able to list all of them, but just stuff.
Any tool that you feel like you're using, but it is very underrated right now? Not a lot of people use it, but they should. Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, so there is this library that we use for our integration testing in our project. It's called K3PO. Like, the name is based out of this Star Wars character. So I think that is one of the interesting tool that I've been using for past 1.5 years. Again, that's a open source tool. So open source library that anyone can use. I think that's quite interesting in terms of the number of problems that tool is able to solve. So definitely, in case someone is interested, they can check it out.
Yeah, Now we're getting nerdy. I love it.
It's crazy complicated, at least for me. Uh, I always end up pinging my teammates to help me resolve, issues. But once it's working, then you are set for quite a long time. You keep changing stuff, and it will work seamlessly. So I think that's the the magic, where it takes kind of some time for you to actually get to know it and implement it for the first time. But once you get a hang of it, it's like a really helpful tool for all your integration testing.
Nice. Okay. Do you use any AI-powered co-pilots at work for help in coding?
Never really felt the need to do that so far. Probably ChatGPT every once in a while, but not extensively any AI tool so far.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. And final question for the interview: what is your work setup like, and what do you do to get in the zone?
Okay, so I use two monitors. One is 27-inch display, another one is 34-inch display. I use a Keychron mechanical keyboard, so I like this loud noise and tuck tuck tuck. And I use this Logitech MX mouse. So that's pretty much it. I would like to keep this, even though I have multiple monitors, I have, habituated to, kind of distribute it across. So I am at a point where it feels really difficult for me if I just have to work on my laptop. So I just assume, like, when I get an opportunity to go to office, I have to, kind of request people to get me a couple of monitors so that I can work efficiently.
Love it. Okay, we're gonna need a picture of your work setup so that we can
Yeah,
put it in the newsletter.
yeah.
Awesome. Awesome, Ankit. It was amazing talking to you. Any final thoughts or anything that you want to leave the listener with before we let you go?
First of all, like, it was awesome talking to you guys, and it's really really interesting to share all this, my perspective, with every one of you. So I think one point that I want to share is, kind of, I've been emphasizing on this since the start, like, always try to understand what your area of interest is. I think that's the primary thing that you should be concentrating on. That's definitely helpful when you are building a career long time. Like, if you keep running behind all this fancy terminologies or buzzword, that's very short lived. Tomorrow we might not have so much hype for one particular technology, but if you decouple yourself from that, it's really useful. Try to understand the core concepts of software engineering rather than just understanding one particular technology, because technology, there is a chance that after 5 years or after 7 years, or nowadays even after 2-3 years, people try to migrate from one to another, someone that is providing better features and better support. But if you're tied to one particular technology, you are at a risk of losing your job, or you're at a risk of kind of losing the importance. So it's always good if you have gathered some knowledge around how the software engineering works in general. What are the core concepts that's going to be applicable for almost all the technologies, right? You are always going to have monitoring, or you are always going to have logging, security, irrespective of languages that you use, irrespective of technologies irrespective of the field that you are in. So knowing all these are really important. Like, if you look from an industry perspective, right now, it's everyone wants to have support where they can move from one cloud provider to another, right? No one wants to build a product that is tied down to one particular provider, like, let's say, AWS or Azure or GCP. Everyone wants to build a product that you can deploy on, like, any cloud, and it works seamlessly. Now, if you assume, if you have only the understanding of AWS, then probably when your company moves from AWS to GCP or to Azure or to some other cloud provider, you are going to have to work hard to gain expertise on another cloud provider from the scratch. So, but if you understand these concepts from basic level, where you don't need to obviously it's good to have certain expertise, but it's also very important to have the basics sorted out, right? That's going to help you grow in long run, irrespective of technologies or irrespective of product that you are working in that particular organization. So let's say when I was at Walmart, I was working on one particular product, building a product, and now I'm at Aklivity, I'm building something else. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all the learnings that I had at Walmart is not helping me here. So if you are able to take do that decoupling where you are learning all these basic concepts, and also you are having some knowledge or some expertise on individual components as well, that's like a parallel thing you have to keep doing throughout your career. If you just kind of get focused on one particular thing, if you're very lucky and that technology is gonna go around for another 25 years, good for you. But if you see some sort of downfall, it's gonna really difficult for people to bounce back from that. So I think that's my only suggestion, feedback, or takeaway from this session.
Really good, really good. It's a fantastic note to end this conversation on. Once again, thank you so much for being with us on this call. It has been so cool to have you here, Ankit.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share.